I'm recording.
Okay, amazing.
I hope.
Yes, it says recording. Okay, yeah, something I've been thinking about is why why do we pursue like what is actually the point of pursuing success? And what does it even look like under capitalism? I feel like I often just get really hard on myself for living unethically, quote unquote, but then I always think, like, actually, why is the onus on me, like a black woman, to be undoing all the faults of white supremacist patriarchal capitalism? Like, why do we burden ourselves with these expectations of like living a moral life, um not being lazy, being a hard work, like all of these things that have been conditioned into us. And I always used to be one of those people that was just like such a hard worker until I questioned why I'm a hard worker and if that's inherently who I am or if that's a survival mechanism. And it's especially absurd when I think about the fact that we're all paying to exist. I saw a meme that said rent is poor people's tax, that we pay to the rich to exist.
Mm.
And the only reason the world is like this, we've all agreed. Like all of us, like ants, have just agreed. Like we've just said, yeah, like, um, yeah, we just like there's just not enough questioning, and I feel like the lack of questioning is what perpetuates a lot of like the suffering. And it's sort of what Termaine was saying, um, which is that why do we like punish people for being lazy when the purpose of existence isn't to work? Like there's no other animal that like lives to work. Like every other animal just like, is just chilling all day, like literally just having a good ass time. I don't know, I guess I'm curious, like how are you guys feeling on a moral, ethical level about like how you spend your days or like how you participate in capitalism? Do you guys feel that you're pressured into feeling guilty? Do you feel that you have a moral responsibility to be like charitable, to be philanthropic, or do you feel like as long as you are just thriving and happy, then like that's more than enough? Like how? Yeah, anyone who wants to speak. Feel
I was gonna say, like, there's this, it's been, because like I said, I've decided to take a year off uni, which isn't a big deal in any big way, but
yeah,
like it isn't something I planned either. And it's been interesting having conversations with people and my parents. And they're all like, so like, what are you gonna do now? And
yeah,
I'm like, I just had like we are in a pandemic, and I've just spent the past 6 months becoming like super mentally ill, and you're all asking me whether I'm going to work now.
yeah,
Like, can I not just exist for like 2 minutes without having to complete something? And
yeah,
even within myself, like I do work, but I tutor kids. I remember somebody else is also doing that.
yeah,
So I don't, like work at. It's just my own. Like it's, completely run by me.
yeah,
And like there's some that like I keep thinking about this weird desire I have to like work a contracted job, as though that's more like that people will take that as being better. They're like, oh, okay, so that's like real work rather than like what I'm doing, which isn't real, even though I'm just doing it to get money. Like,
yeah. It's
I had
wild.
a really similar experience. After I finished high school, I wanted to take a gap year because I didn't know what I wanted to do at uni. Like I'd enrolled in engineering, not wanting to actually be an engineer. And it was the same thing. Everyone was like, but what are you going to do for a year? Like, you don't have enough money to go traveling overseas. So, like, you're not going to do that. So, what's the point? You're just going to be a bartender. You'll probably won't go to uni. And I was thinking, like, I just spent 12 years in education getting like great marks the whole time and everything. And now you want me to spend another 4+ years just without any break or anything. But in that time, I actually learned so much about myself and what I wanted to do. And yeah, like I'm now on a completely different path after that just 1 year.
Yeah.
Gap years should be mandatory.
Yeah.
It reminds
Isn't
me.
it in America that like if you take a gap year, you can't even get into uni?
Really?
You can. A lot of schools
Yeah.
offer it now. What
Okay.
you're talking about that reminded me of just like the definition of like laziness versus like, I don't know, it comes up a lot, like me being autistic, but also in like the ADHD community too, of like laziness is like when you can do something and you choose not to, versus like wanting to actually do something and not being able to is not laziness. And so like I think a lot of this comes down to like your purpose and why you're doing it. And like if you don't have a meaning and you don't have a reason, it's not necessarily laziness. That's just like I don't know what to do yet. That's not like a lack of intrinsic value. And I think we conflate the two a lot. We say laziness is just if you're not doing work, but like there are many reasons you might not be doing something that go
Yeah.
beyond like the lack of the choice to just rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you brought up like being autistic and having ADHD. I, at some point, it was actually in my undergrad, I was like doing really badly I was just like, my mental health was terrible. I was doing really badly and I just had so much anxiety. So they told me to go see a counselor and she was like, oh, you have ADHD. And I was like, I don't know that I have that. I think I just don't like my major. Like I think it's just not interesting. And like fast forward a few years, I have a nephew who is now 11, but he was diagnosed with ADHD. Well, he was in grade 1. I'm not sure how old that was. And I just remember thinking the same thing. Like, doesn't if school is gonna be so trash, like if teachers are all, not all, a lot of school is just you being forced to sit in a classroom for hours on end, like listening to someone in a monotone voice speak about some shit that will never be consequential. Wouldn't we all just have ADHD? Like, I don't like how society always not only punishes, but medicalizes just normal behavior, like normal reactions to stimuli. Like,
Like non-conformity.
yeah, I feel like a lot of times I've been made to feel that I'm mentally ill until realizing that no, like society is sick. Like
Yeah.
I'm completely fine. Everything else just doesn't make sense. Like it is not healthy to be well adjusted to a sick society. And I just think a lot of us who are like diagnosed or who are made to feel mentally ill a lot of times are actually just healthy human beings who don't conform to a society that's inherently sick and twisted.
And unconscious.
Yeah, and unconscious. Like, I feel like a lot of times the fact that I'm not a sociopath, like, I don't want to kill people. Like, I don't, like, I feel so crazy arguing with people about why, like, child slavery is bad. Like the fact that I still have to argue with people to be like, no, we don't have to enslave millions and millions of kids just so that we can live comfortable life. Like we don't have to live like this actually. And I find myself arguing with people so much, especially people who defend billionaires, where they're like, but they earned their right to be a billionaire. And I'm like, no one has to suffer for one person's comfortability. Like, why is that such a radical idea? Like, why? Yeah.
I think it comes to the point that it's like the entire, in a way, the entire world is brainwashed because you are set into this system. So like the idea of success that you're talking about is like the idea of success to like someone living in poverty. The necessity for success is way more important to them than say some middle class kid where they can go up and do like a major in social science and like explore these like ideas, or they can afford to kind of be not successful in in a financial sense. You know, I think that like the walls of the maze kind of determine a lot about your life and what you can what you're able to see and what you're able to think about. So a lot of people are I categorize them as unconscious because they just are. So like you're talking to someone like, oh, don't buy this thing that's made by, you know, child slaves. They're just like, what are you talking about? No, blah. It's just there's blinkers on. No,
Yeah.
but what do you mean? Like life has just been made so convenient that everyone is kind of, you know, in a zombie way, just moving around without thinking. And it also plays into why people don't critically think, because they don't think. Like everyone is being kept alive in my country, you know, like so many
Yeah.
people are being
You have
kept
no
alive
reason
by
to
the
think.
government. If they were like left out in the fields, they would all die. Like we'd half the population tomorrow if we didn't have electricity, you know. So yeah, I think it's a big part to do with that. It's by design.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. I don't know if anyone has any like thoughts on that.
Back to mental illness. When I was in elementary school, I was diagnosed with a learning disability, but I always felt like it's not me with the problem. Like I just don't vibe with traditional academics.
Yeah.
And so you can move out of a learning disability. So in high school, I was ruled as not having it anymore because I was able to conform to what traditional academics want you to do. So
Yeah.
like now I'm able to conform to that, but like I never really had like mental illness. I just didn't like how academics is in
Yeah.
the traditional sense.
Yeah.
It's really common with indigenous children as well, because they're not used to that kind of system. So they just get kind of categorized as having a learning disability.
Well, I think the whole of mental illness is how much do you conform to the majority. It's like not about illness, it's about
Yeah.
conforming. And it's about external effects of your experience, not internal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like it's also about like difference in general, right? Like anything that differs from the norm currently or throughout history is like either perceived as like a threat to yourself or to like your system. And I feel like mental illness is the same thing. Like it's been something that's perceived as a threat to the system, right? Yeah, and the same thing then with disabilities or even like people that identify in any kind of different way. It's always perceived as a threat. And so then you end up with things being like, okay, well, this is the perfect human and everything outside of this, we don't know how you fit here. So you're different and you need to change, or we just keep you to the outskirts. Whereas like, I think within our generation, we're like growing that bubble and it's like, oh, okay, like I don't know your experience of life through this lens, but it's still valid, and like we just have a different experience of it, and what you need and what I need are different things.
That's so interesting. Gavin, you're from New Zealand?
Yeah.
What is you were talking about like the indigenous kids and how they're often medicalized. What is that process?
I think like for the most part, because I grew up in an indigenous community, so I don't know how different it is for kids who grow up in the more urban communities.
Yeah.
But because we grow up within our culture, I think once we start, like I remember when I started going to a white school, it was just totally different, because it's quite kind of hard to explain, but I knew like a lot of the indigenous kids were put into the special needs class because basically they grew up learning about things that are useful in nature and, you know, things that are useful to our culture. And then once you go to high school and you're like, they start putting you into these classes like mathematics and English, all these standard learning, I forget what they call it. It's just like the standardized curriculum, I guess. And then they just start to struggle from like that point onwards, and they kind of just get written off and like put into that other class, and like, oh, they're not going to be useful to society, so we'll just keep them over here while all the other kids carry on and move forward, and we'll help those kids more.
I feel like it's quite a recent thing though, this idea that like these other like humanity survived with all these differences for so long. Like, why do we suddenly think we know better and to get rid of
Yeah.
it?
Mm.
And so many of these indigenous cultures like thrived for so long. So why do we now think that needs to be eradicated? Like,
Yeah.
It's
your
funny,
downfall.
conservatives will say, oh, they haven't survived that, so therefore they were trash. It's like, no, they didn't survive because you destroyed them. You know, like it's a talking point on the right to say, oh no, well, they're not, they're not thriving because their cultures aren't great, that's why we're better. But it's like the ahistorical reading of that is phenomenal. It's part of the delusion of that mindset. I think that it's like, oh yeah, we're great and we're successful.
Yeah. Does anyone here feel like they've found like fulfillment in what they do for work? Or even like meaning? Or do you
I
feel
do.
like you're doing what you were put here to do on this planet?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
do.
I do.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
I will say that for me, I don't like my job, but I feel like because Bobo, you said like without, like, I forgot what you said, but like humans don't want freedom. Like we want to have some rules. And for me, like I don't like my job, but I feel like without it, like I would just be in a void of like, what am I doing? So like sometimes I appreciate my job because it gives me something to do and then I can do what I want afterwards. Not that it's correct, but like sometimes I appreciate it in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like my job, but I get to listen to podcasts all day and books. So to me, it's like I see that as being a good job, even though it's not what I'm going to do forever, just because it gives me freedom. Like to me, it's kind of, I feel like I get paid to learn because that's all I do basically while I'm working.
So sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I like definitely hate my job, but I have access to really rich, powerful white spaces,
Yeah.
and I push them in ways that make them really uncomfortable.
That's
Yeah.
fun.
And so that's part of what I was touching on before. It's like, is that enough? I don't really know. I'm still ultimately helping them because I'm still doing my job that they're paying me for. But I've pushed them to do things they would never have done otherwise to help other people.
Awesome.
And so I think in some ways I'm like, well, is that what I'm supposed to do? Like as a white cisgendered woman, like am I supposed to access these white rich men that other people don't have access to make it a more even playing field? I don't know.
I think if you enjoy it and like and that brings you satisfaction, I don't like this idea that like we have to do something because then you end up resenting the fact that you have to be there and have to be
Yeah.
around them. I used to work in finance and I felt like, oh, like I'm because I can do that. I
Yeah.
should. And now, I went on this journey of like, but what do I actually enjoy doing? And like maybe that's not my best and highest use, but I actually like it. So like how do you take the skills that you have that you enjoy and then the things that society needs and like find something that works at least to pay the bills for me.
I was reading something today that was just like everything you do is useless, but you have to behave as if it's not useless.
Yeah.
So kind of like the absurdism idea, I think, where it's like you behave as if you don't think it's useless, but it is actually useless, and that is the absurdity of your life. So if you find something in your job that you can, like no matter what you do is going to be useless anyway. So you might as well do this job and do something good within that job, kind of thing, I suppose.
That's what I've come to think as well. Yeah. A lot. I agree.
Find enjoyment in pushing the boulder.
Yeah, like I need to get paid anyway, and if I don't do it, someone else will do it. Like they'll just replace me, right? Like marketing managers are a fucking dime a dozen. Like who the fuck cares? But like I can do it, get paid, pay off my student loans, and then push them in ways that like I think is making things better.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a win-win. I don't know.
The hippie notion of like, oh man, just you don't have to work, just live off the land. All of those people are rich. All those people who say that are rich. Even Buddhist monks who live in temples, they like get money from the community. So like they don't even, you know what I mean? So all these people who are saying like you don't have to work, blah blah blah, are all they have the ability to not work. So it's like stop listening to those people also, you know
Live
what I
in
mean?
$1 million monastery.
Yeah.
Well, it's like the
It's funny
manifest.
thinking about religion and like monks and nuns and like these like religious sanctuaries where people devote their entire life. Because I had this last year, I was just like having a whole moment, and then I just was walking and I was like, you know what, like I just want to be a nun. Like that's it, like I just want to be a nun, because then me like not doing anything and me just like eating and sleeping and thinking all day is like perfectly fine and acceptable. And it was such a funny thing that like that my brain went straight to that, because it was like, oh, that's what people deem as like an okay space to do these things in, but as soon as you're not in that space, it's not okay.
Yeah, so true.
Honestly, I'm about to do that. Like there's like this monastery like a 7-hour drive away, and I feel like at some point this year I'm just gonna go there and just like live forever.
Well, they've become so much more popular as well. Like a lot of people go and do like silent retreats and like go and spend like a month or like 3 months, 6 months at a monastery. And that's like just so interesting that it's become a lot more popular for like the like general population to like try it for bits of time, because clearly we're like seeking solace in ways that we wouldn't have before. Because I know at least like in Italian culture beforehand, like unless you were going to be a nun, like you wouldn't be, or a priest, like you wouldn't go and do those things, you know.
It's funny, in back in the day in my culture, either you became like a doctor or a teacher, or you became a priest or a nun. Like it was a huge thing that like the children who didn't get married went off to the nunnery or went off to the priesthood, or you know, so it was like that's why we had so many nuns and priests in Ireland. But yeah, I got shipped off to the convent. So yeah.
Fascinating. I think it's fascinating how like for me my dream life is just living like Socrates, like just being barefoot and asking everyone questions all day.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like just
Conversation for food.
Drunk. Yeah. But it's funny how like centuries ago being a philosopher was that was a legit, like you could actually it was a respectable way to spend your time, to spend your day interrogating everyone about justice and freedom and death and mortality.
And they were respected.
Yeah, they were so respected and valued. And now it's like, bitch, why don't you work in a cubicle? Like what
And I feel like you had to be a white man and probably rich anyways the whole time.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly.
100%.
There's a pattern emerging.
Yeah. There's also the same thing with artists, right? Like artists and philosophers as well. Like artists were people who were valued in society, particularly if you look at, you know, like indigenous cultures, you know, artists were people that were like heavily valued. And now in Australia, we're getting like complete cuts to the arts, even though like in like 2019, I think it was, we made up like 50% of the GDP or whatever. Like and all people like always this like broken artist that like never has a job and like is always broke and like is just trying to make, like why is that how we see our artists now? Like that shouldn't be. They should just be like normal people who are making things that make us think or feel good or whatever.
I think fame has something to do with that. I think we equate art with fame, and unfortunately when you pursue fame, you sacrifice a lot of your livelihood. So I think a lot of industries, or a lot of like the entertainment industry, scam artists by promising them fame in return for absolutely nothing, because there's the assumption that fame will bring you money and but most of the time that's just not the case. The broke artist is usually, the modern day broke artist is just a broke artist who's pursuing clout as opposed to just like it's a means to do your work. And it's something I thought about a lot. I used to really want to work in fashion, and after working in fashion, I realized, wait, I don't want to work in fashion actually. I just liked the glamour that is associated with fashion. And I feel like I wasted, oh no, it wasn't a waste because you don't know what you don't know. But I spent a lot of time like chasing symbols of success instead of actually like pursuing what would genuinely me, which is another thing, like symbols of success like fame and clout and access don't ever seem to fulfill anyone. And yet like they're always the things that are sold to us as like bait.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating.
The desire for privilege is
Do you feel
another
like
thing that,
Yeah.
like I find that in myself that I have to,
do you think a
I'm
lot
actually
of the
trying to work at it. My desire for, I read this thing recently that it was like an artist block can manifest in fantasy, living in fantasy. So I was like, oh man, I live in fantasy. Like I have 10 different lives by the end of but you know, all the things I would do if I was a politician or a musician or in charge of my local city, and oh, I would change this and change that and blah blah blah. I'm constantly doing it, and I can't remember the point of that when I started, but yeah, there you go. Segue. Blank.
Although you talked about ethical consumption under capitalism, and I wanted to kind of go back to that. So I'm vegan for ethical reasons. I don't want to eat animals. But then I think about, well, my fruits are like being made by immigrants in horrible conditions. And then I think about my clothes, like what if like sweatshop workers. And so I'm constantly having a dilemma of ethics. And then I'm like, why is this on me? Like I didn't cause this, like the white man caused this. So but then like I don't want to be like effed and like just do whatever. So like it's just a constant battle.
Yeah, I get into that as well. And I was talking to some friends about this too, because as much as I get, especially now since the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor incident, there's been so many like corporations and publications suddenly like wanting to be inclusive of Black people, like reaching out. And I always think like, this is so corny. Like you're actually so corny. I don't actually want to associate myself with you. But then I think like, am I in a position of privilege to be saying no to coin? Like just because a brand isn't ethical? And then I think like, what is the point of being a martyr? Like me suffering for, I don't know like how productive, or I haven't figured it out for myself. Like I internally feel gross working with brands that I don't believe are ethical, which is most corporations. But I also feel gross being broke. So like, I also think like, how is it productive? To what extent is being ethical productive? It's really the question that, like, if it really weighs on you, and if it decays your own quality of life, then is it even ethical? Like, is pursuing ethics ethical if it decays your quality of life? Because if you're not being ethical to you and your mental well-being, is that ethical? Like, I guess.
But what about, like, you're saying, like, if it's not productive to you or, like, making you feel good, then, like, that's not ethical. But then, like, what about people who get joy from causing pain to others? Like, that's horrible, too. But, like, do we say, oh, but it brings them joy, like just let them do it? Like, I don't know.
That's a really good point.
The problem though is if you don't convince enough people to go with you, like it doesn't really make an impact. So it's like if we all did this at the same time.
But you could have said that about veganism, and look where veganism is now.
Yeah. I
think some people pursue it as an identity, and some people actually pursue it for ethical reasons. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think there's like too much moral responsibility put on the individual, and I think that's just like what's the word? Like a consequence of like neoliberalism. Like we're all like individually being like, you have to say all the right things online, and you have to boycott every single thing. instead of all of us rising up together to like overthrow, etc. And like there are a bunch of like Bangladeshi like activists and like, you know, the people who are working in those companies not getting wages, and they're like, actually you don't have to boycott these big brands like H&M, you can just advocate for our higher wages instead. And I feel like, yeah, we're always just like, let's avoid buying from this person instead of being like, let's actually help them like earn more. Yeah, so I feel like that's like the step we should be thinking
on that
about
recently, actually. And
Yeah.
they talked about, if you talk to the workers who make those garments, they will often say, please don't boycott us. But if you just help speak up for us to get higher wages, like that's going to make a way bigger difference.
That gave me mental clarity.
I think people are just trying to like avoid their own guilt. Like, I didn't buy from this person, I'm a good person, you know, instead of like actually doing what would be most helpful.
This also reminds me of something that I was reading recently, that there's like a new eating disorder starting to be recognized called orthorexia, which is like an obsession with healthy food and like only eating clean foods. And for some people, veganism falls under that. Like they just, because you can't eat something if it's got cheese or whatever. And that like to the point where people's obsession on eating healthy food actually makes them really, really ill because they just can't like eat enough different things. And it feels like these like questions of how to live ethically is a very similar issue where we're boiling it down to these real micro interactions of like, I can't possibly have a single interaction where someone is harmed, to the point where like all of those little interactions that we question and trouble over actually like inflate to be such a big weight on our shoulders, when if you focus more on like your big picture impact instead of thinking about like every little dollar that you spend, you might actually end up being happier and having a better impact overall. Does that make sense?
I like that.
Yeah, and orthorexia is definitely like it's an obsession with purity, and I wonder if that obsession with purity carries over into our behaviors.
Yeah, I feel like it's a very similar thought process.
I saw a quote that was like, don't like focus on what you're fighting against, focus like what you're fighting for. And like that mental shift could like help in this process of ethical consumption dilemma.
I feel like because I'm a bit of a radical when it comes to this stuff, and I take on like that identity a little bit too much, and people are like, Christina, calm down, you know, and I'm like, okay. But when I go shopping, say for food, I always try and I know that you can make an impact in your purchase by choosing to purchase from this shop, which is small, versus a big shop, which is corporate. So like that can make an impact, and it's a very small act by yourself, but it actually does contribute in a meaningful way. The boycott, that's interesting you said that about the boycotting stuff, because I'm a big advocate for like, I don't like buy fast fashion at all, and I'm like, nobody's allowed to buy anything. No buying anything everywhere. But I think that's more as well just from my own like obsession with buying things, and you know, that like the desire to get more and more and more, it kind of just it helps me more actually to not buy things than maybe someone in a factory. But I would hope that my advocacy also would raise awareness, but maybe it's not productive for those workers at the end of the day. It's a hard one, like it's a very complex situation.
There was this book, and I don't remember the title of it, but the first page was like basically just said that like, even if you sat in a chair or like sat on the floor and breathed and didn't do anything else for the rest of your life, like that was all you did, in our current society, you would still be unethical. Like you still would not be living an ethical life, even if you didn't do anything. And I feel like it's because we've created this, it's kind of insane, because I think for many of us, it's actually difficult to visualize like how global and how interconnected the world is. Like it's such a system And it's so complex, and we've created this like grand big thing, and then it comes down to like one small human being who's just like, I have no idea like what I'm doing or why, like I did not ask to be born and exist in this sphere now. And so like, I don't know, for me at least, like I just get so lost in thinking about like what life would have been X amount of years ago. And I'm like, I would have rather been like a caveman and like died at like, I don't know, at birth, or like 20 years old, and just like lived my life eating and like just looking at the sky, and that would have been it. You know, like it's so complex now.
Yeah, it's also like, because someone had brought up veganism. I think a lot of people try to be pure vegans, which I know this is an unpopular opinion coming from a vegan, but I don't actually think that's necessary. Like, I think the problem with eating animals is animal agriculture, and not so much eating animals itself.
Yeah.
For me, I personally vegan because I had started practicing Buddhism, Nichiren Buddhism to be specific, and I think about a year after, I was like, wait, the energy transfer that happens when you kill an animal then goes into your food and then into your body and then into your mind, psyche. I don't know if this is true. This is just my own personal theory. But I do feel like a lot of like the moral and ethical conundrums that come from veganism come from animal agriculture, and not so much. Like I think about like indigenous tribes, a lot of them were predominantly plant-based, but they still like ate animals, but they also respected the animals that they ate, and they still like treated them with dignity and. So there's a lot of like complexity and nuance to that. But I also think like, why kill yourself? Like trying to be pure, like nothing is pure in this world. Like nothing escapes suffering. Like even like the most beautiful flower will eventually die or like get stepped on or whatever it is. Like I think we framed suffering as something that's inherently bad, as opposed to like just a part of life. So I don't think the goal of living ethically is to eradicate suffering. I think the goal is to eradicate unnecessary suffering, which is a good distinction to make, because it also lessens the burden of morality on the individual, because it's really not on you. Yeah, I think that's how I've been.
I think you'll like this quote. I read it today. It was crying and laughing are the same thing, just one feels better in your body.
Yeah, no, literally.
So yeah, I think
from the ethical side of like, I don't know, this makes me think of a quote I saw yesterday about like the best way to cure the child is to heal the parent, and it was about like the best way to raise a child, you know, to be the best they can is to heal yourself. Yeah. But it reminds me of the ethical, like what if the most ethical thing is just to heal yourself and feel, you know, the most in your whatever your experience will be, and that all the people who have not healed are contributing all the worst parts to society. So
I agree. Yeah, I heard a quote once that said like, the best thing you can do for humanity is to clean your own house so that everyone who walks through it can experience your cleanliness. Which I think
it's a Michael Jackson song.
Oh, is it?
Looking at the man in the mirror. I'm looking to
I listened to that yesterday.
Now I know. But yeah, like I think that's all that can be. I mean, I think the larger question here is like, what do we owe each other? Like, what do you think you, an individual, owes everyone around you, if anything? Because I know a lot of people believe nothing. What do you guys believe we owe each other?
I actually think like in my personal life recently, I've started getting into budgeting my finances. And that's made me think a lot about like where my money's going, and like on that topic, and under like, you know, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. I've been trying to budget so that I spend as much of my income as I can supporting artists and supporting people that add value back to my life. So like, for example, subscribing to this Patreon so that you can continue to make content, because that benefits me. And like, how dare I, consume this content that you've spent time working on without giving anything back, and instead like spending my money on fast food that goes straight to some rich white dude. So yeah, for me, what I feel like I owe other people is to invest in artists and creators that make content that I enjoy, so that I'm actually paying for the things that I enjoy instead of just paying for consumerism.
Wow.
I feel similarly about privilege. Like, I feel like for me, what I think, because I come from such a place of privilege, I always like the way that I think of what I like owe or should do for other people is like counteract the fact that I exist in the world and I'm automatically in a certain space. So like I said, I'm from Hong Kong, but obviously I'm white, and I'm an expat, an immigrant really, but anyways, and such a stupid word. And like, Hong Kong is going through, like, this past year has been so intense, and it's like crazy how, like, looking at friends of mine who like were all, like upper middle class white people basically, how they disconnect, or like where their like activism or their care stops. And I just always feel like I have a responsibility, because of the fact that like I've walked through Hong Kong living an incredible life and I love it, and then there's people who live in cages in Hong Kong, and I'm like, what, I need to be here and like doing something for you guys. Like, I need to be able to like use all of this stuff that I have for you. That's what I feel like how I think that of the way that I need to like help others is like, how can I use my position or the things that I have that are advantageous to me for other people.
I feel the same because I have such, like, I'm upper middle class and I'm able to not consume like animals, and I'm able to buy clothes that are not fast fashion. So if I'm able to do that, then I should. That's what I feel like.
Yeah, I feel for me, I know that you can't force anyone to do anything they don't want to do, and even you can like, lead a horse to water, it won't drink. So for me in my life, I like to be an example of, because I've done therapy that has changed my life, and I've made decisions that have changed my life, and they haven't been difficult decisions actually, and it's very doable. So I like to, what I think I owe other people is just to be like, hey, like, break out of this, break out of this mindset. It is not necessarily better, but more fulfilling if you live more consciously, and you will be more connected, and things won't be as confusing, and they will also be more confusing, but there's more of a grasp, there's more of a wholeness about you, and like a connection to the universe and a connection to each other. So I feel like that's what I try to give people, is like a connection, and kind of like here's a book on this, and here's the name of my therapist, and here's a website, and here's this, and blah blah blah, and just to kind of be an open book, so that if people want to pursue that, then they can. And I've seen it happen, and that's as much as I can do. But yeah, I think that really frustrates me as well, because I'm like, I'd make such a good AOC. Why doesn't someone put me in charge? I'll change the world, la la la. So, but I don't have anywhere near that kind of power, or so I'm just kind of like, I can only exist in this bubble, this small influencer bubble, if you could even call me that. And then, if I see one person like kind of ask me some questions, I think that's good,
I think it's also merit to talk about selfishness within this though, because for me at least, I know that definitely like I get pleasure out of thinking that I'm doing something ethical, and that has nothing to do with anyone else except for me being like, well, yes, I'm clearly above whatever, like with veganism, or like also I've been really involved in sustainability, and originally was like zero waste, and after like a lot of reflection I was like, that's definitely because I'm like, well, I know that I personally am not going to solve climate change, but like at least I'm not contributing as much to it, and that's for myself. So I feel like it's so relevant as like what we do but I don't know whether that's an intrinsically human thing or a learned human thing. Like, have we always been completely selfish, or is that because of like my cultural upbringing in more individualistic societies, etc.?
Like, I think the major goal of humanity is to wake everybody up, because we don't have time. Like, when people make like arguments against being kind of a radical vegan, and I understand those completely, and everyone do what they want, and I'm the same also. Like, I make mistakes, or not mistakes, whatever. But I'm just like, guys, the place is burning down. We're fucked. Like, come on, there's not time enough left for us to be pussyfooting around. We kind of have to accelerate understanding. And at the same time, that mindset doesn't work, which is,
I think everybody's very different, and like I personally don't get enjoyment out of the self. Like, I'm not vegan, I'm vegetarian just because I've never liked the texture or taste of meat. But like, I don't get anything from calling myself this or thinking I'm pure. Like, for some reason, that just doesn't have an impact on me. I like to do things like that I think have an impact, because I like hope that the world will get better. But I think everybody has their individual motivations, and so it's almost like a blanket thing doesn't always work for everybody. And like, I think if it does give you, but it's awesome that for some people, like, doing good makes them feel good. I noticed that when I worked in a job where consulting, but we were working with a lot of nonprofits, government, and for some people, doing good in your work is like enough satisfaction to cover the whole thing. You don't actually have to enjoy the job. For me, I like would rather enjoy the job and sell my soul than not sell my soul but hate my job, and that's like my selfish thing. Like, everybody has their own equation that works for them. Like, I'd rather make the money in a way that I enjoy, but maybe it's not perfect or pure, but then I can like spend it in a way that I think helps.
I think that begs the question of like, if you think that whether or not you get personal enjoyment out of doing a good thing is just like a personality trait more so than anything, then like, why is it that we have this obsession with saying that if you do a good thing for your own reason, for your own enjoyment, that it actually doesn't make it a good thing to do? Like, can it not just coincidentally have a good outcome for both?
I can be said for like any kind of charity, right? Like, do you think we would even be charitable if it didn't make ourselves feel good? Like, is that possible?
Oh my God, they're punishing you even in doing a nice thing. It's like, well, you'd enjoyed it, so it's not even nice.
No, I don't think I agree with that, because like, I think there's probably an evolutionary like reason, in the same way that there's like an evolutionary reason why humans are empathetic, and we're like, empathy is just an adaptive trait, and we're empathetic for the survival of our species. So I'm sure we're also altruistic. I'm sure altruism feels good for the survival of our species. That's just an assumption. I don't know if that's actually true. But I'm assuming we'd probably all be extinct if it didn't feel good. But then I think about like, I don't know how empathetic humanity is, no, I think we've just been conditioned out of it. Yeah, I don't know.
I feel like empathy is a learned trait. I feel like I wasn't empathetic at all when I was a child, and I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm actually a psychopath. This is concerning. And then sometime in my teen years, I just started reading more and becoming a lot more empathetic, and now everything weighs me down so much.
Children are psychos.
I think a lot of empathy comes from trauma too. Like, those of us who are empaths, like, pretty universally have like a history of trauma. Well, you have to think about the other before yourself. Like, in some, I don't know, that's what I was thinking about when we were talking about like, what do you owe to other people? Because like, I spent my whole life thinking I owed my entire self to other people, and like, flipping it, I've actually now realized that by doing that, I was giving no value to anybody. And by doing things for myself, I am now actually adding value to other people by like creating something positive. Like being miserable and owing yourself to everything just doesn't help.
Yeah, the most value you can give is your authentic self to the world, because
I went to a tarot reader one time and she told me that my purpose in life is to do what I love, because that way I'm exuding energy, like good energy for other people. But I always thought that that was selfish to do what I like while like other people are like suffering. So then I struggled with that idea. So like if you do what you want to do, then like it just kind of seems selfish, but it also like helps other people, she said. So I don't know.
I think it kind of made me think just now what you were saying, Gavin, about what you posted about 6ix9ine and him giving to charity. I think you posted about that, Bobo. He 6ix9ine was gonna like give one, and the charity refused to take his money. It was like a child, and I just like that. I thought about that for so long, because that like my first instinct is like, it's disgusting. Like the fact that he's even famous and like remains fully unharmed is just like shocking. But then like, should they have taken it or not? I'm like, I don't know, because my reaction would be like, no, of course I'm not going to take it, because like you're a pedophile. And like, no. But then also like, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Would you probably taken it and then like written a press release.
Accepting it.
Yeah.
I think not taking it ends up being like a symbol, right? Like how Bobo talks about like progress, but then it's like, just think about the people the money is helping, and I think then they should have taken it
and written like a dirty press release after, being like, thanks for your money,
and then
but you're a dirty perv, and we want the whole world to know. We're gonna use your money for this, and this. Yeah, we've been, but
I think this is really fascinating.
Are influencers allowed to do that? Like, can you like do a sponsored post for a makeup brand and then the next day be like, this company is unethical? Like, I feel like that would solve the problem.
It's in the contract to be like, you are not allowed.
Oh.
Sometimes they also do this thing where they're like, if anyone comments anything bad, you have to delete.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I've been having a back and forth with this brand about it, and they're just like, no, like take it or leave it. So to take it. But yeah, that's what it is. It's wild.
I think it's all really fascinating because the everyday consumer really just does not give a fuck. Like, so I just came from selling sunglasses to people in the middle of a pandemic, and like those bitches just are ripping the glasses off the shelf, trying them on. They're all like, oh, I have to put them in a tray so they can get sanitized. And I'm all like, do you want to die of the Rona? I'll go ahead. Like, you can have it. But they don't care. They're all like, oh, these are $300. What deal are you going to cut me? And I'm all like, what do you mean, what deal? Like, you're lucky I'm even still here. Like, I want to be in my PJs. You're lucky you just don't walk out right now, but I still need a paycheck.
Yeah.
It's just so fascinating because then, like, well, like, the ethicality of it, and I'm all like, the people shopping, we can impress upon them all you want, the ethicality of it. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of people who are following these influencers, they're not reading, they're not educating themselves, and it's disheartening to see.
Yeah.
I wish one thing could be brought to the fore. Like, hypocrisy is like one of my biggest pet peeves. It's like, you know, the amount of people who are like Black Lives Matter and the Black Square and blah blah blah, and then go and buy a top in Zara and H&M. You know, it's like I actually don't. It's not that I don't mind, but like, it's not that I care. No, I do care, but it's just like, do one or the other, you know, like have the mindset. But I suppose that comes back to critical thinking, like have like a broader picture. But so many things for so many people exist in a vacuum, you know.
Well, I think there's so much, and like why some of this like boycotting works is so much of our world and so many people in our world, like reputation is just the number one thing on their mind, and like it doesn't matter. And in some ways social media has helped social justice in that like that your stances on things have now become part of your reputation as a person in your community, and so now you like have to take a stand to like preserve your reputation.
Oh
But
yeah.
is it helping? I don't know, but it's
And it's
almost like the only way to motivate people is the reputation.
Yeah, like is performative activism, does it do benefit?
Mm.
Honestly, I don't think it does, because I think it just look. I don't think anyone should feel morally obligated. I just don't believe in moral obligations. Like, I really don't think anyone should feel obligated to do anything, because like you're just performing then. Like that moral obligation is just a performance that's taking up space that would otherwise be occupied by like genuine activism, which I think now like a lot of genuine activism just gets lost in the soul. Like the black tile thing was such a good metaphor for what performative activism does, because all it did was just erase like valuable information, which I think is what like you're just taking up space. But it's like just post your titties and go. Like if you're just like you're not doing us a favor. Like it's actually fine. Just post your titties and go.
Yeah, and I was talking to my friend the other day because she was talking about social media activism, and I was like, it's interesting though, because I feel like it's been hijacked, because I feel like actually social media, as it's grown in the past 20 odd years, has like a lot of minority communities have found connections via the internet and via social media that they never would have, and have created this sort of like this thing that never would have become as mainstream as it has if it wasn't for the internet. And then now as it becomes like more and more popular and more, there's more of an obligation to now be like a social activist, or like to care about social justice. Like a lot of these movements that actually really did connect communities or really were to spread awareness about different things become boycotted by this huge mainstream. And I'm like, I don't know if that's necessarily beneficial or not. Like, yes, it reaches more people, but then it also becomes watered down and it's not as radical.
Yeah.
Although some of how our like government works, my brother worked in a congressional office, and like they literally just tally the number of people who call on an issue. It doesn't matter the depth or the understanding. It's just like they'll only do something once a certain number of people it hits critical awareness.
Yes. Yeah, I was thinking that it's like I've been trying to get more people to email their representatives, because I'm like, I think they're really fragile. I think they're just really fragile. Just email them, because I've seen the smallest Twitter like thing actually bring results in government, because they're so fragile with their egos, So like that is so interesting that they're like, oh no, we got 20. That means we must act. Like
there was this woman who works in a political office, and she had posted, please send us all the emails, because it's very easy to overwhelm your local office because they are understaffed and there isn't enough people. Like if 100 people send in an email, that's enough to overwhelm them.
Yeah.
Wait, I had no idea. I always thought those things didn't work, but that's good to know.
That's wild.
Definitely works. Calls as well. I think there's a benefit to having so many like old people in office as well, because I think they don't really understand how easy it is for like younger people to send emails now.
Well, especially since, and that's another thing that's great about social media, is a lot of people early on who was creating like swipe ups in their story to link you to already pre-filled in emails, and you could just send.
But actually with those, they once they get enough, they put a thingy through their system which automatically sends those all to spam, because they know these are format. So you're more worth writing like, hey bitch, fuck you, and then they're gonna have to open the email and delete it themselves, than writing like, this is why you shouldn't do this, and use a template thing, because that they won't, it'll just go straight to spam.
Wow. So interesting.
I feel enlightened from this conversation.
Do any of you guys feel like you're living in your purpose, or like believe that we have one?
I mean, I don't think we have a purpose, but I do feel like just existing, if you're like from any kind of marginalized community, like that is purpose. Like just
Mm.
existing and like
Wow.
being present and like
Being
being
it.
visible.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's
I
just that.
also don't. Oh, you go.
Mm.
No, go on. Were you saying something?
I was just gonna say, I don't think we do have a purpose, but I feel like I'm living mine. Like I don't feel that I question, do I have like a meaning or what am I meant to do? Because I just feel like what I'm doing at the moment,
Yeah.
like is really suits me.
Your purpose is what makes you feel good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think I find. Oh,
Sorry, no, go on.
I was gonna say, I also think I find that a lot of people I know, and myself included, that like our families try to tell us we have purpose because we have a job, and I'm all like, I don't know if you know what you're
Creating
talking
capital.
about, but okay, cool.
For me, I've also found like my purpose, my personal purpose that I've decided is like I have all these ideas in my head and like worlds I imagine, and I want to manifest like the imagination physically before I die
Oh.
in some way.
I love that.
Mm.
I think that like for a lot of people, they think when they think of purpose, they think of it being this like inherently good higher thing. But sometimes I think that like as a relatively privileged person, my purpose is just to like keep the cogs of like oppression running. And like that's shitty to think about.
Yeah.
But so then I try to like subjugate that or like circumnavigate that by like defeating it within, even though like I think that like I'm just part of like a capitalism cog. Like I'm here to like get a good job, make a good wage, buy a lot of shit, and like keep a lot of people down, and like that is my purpose. But I try to work against that.
So fascinating.
Interesting how even like privilege is subjective. Like it's still related to capitalism.
Yeah.
Right.
Like for me, I feel like I'm more privileged than most people who come from like wealthy backgrounds, even though I come from like a poor background, just because of like, you know, I have the privilege of being exposed to, I guess, like my culture and having, I think like there's a big difference between like, for example, billionaires. I feel like they grow up, they don't really have a point of reference for like empathy or compassion. Whereas people from like poorer backgrounds, we at least have that like something to reference from our childhoods of like compassion and kindness. So I think it's easier for us to like learn that.
But then I think there's this interesting thing of when people become out of touch. Like I think that there's this like there's a point where like I know, so like my grandparents or like my like down, oh, my brain's just blanked, down the line were like super poor, no schooling, illiterate, like complete, but like I've grown up in like a very like upper middle class scenario, and my dad, you know, like obviously now has a lot of money, but he grew up being like very working class. But I'm also like, but you're out of touch now, like because you always refer back to like your childhood and what you experienced and all this stuff, but like that's not your experience anymore, and your life has been so different, and you don't deal with any of those things are no longer a reality for you. So like I always think, because there's also that whole thing like the self-made billionaire or the like self-made millionaire, where they're like, I came from nothing to the top, and it's like, well, do you remember really what it was to be nothing anymore? Because
you know what I can think of? There's a question I think about all the time. Okay, this is really controversial. I don't necessarily have a stance on this, but I think about it all the time. I wonder if like people live for too long. Like I think there's a quote. There's a quote that's like, you either die a hero or you live long enough to be a villain.
Yeah.
I wonder if like we've just extended lifespans for a bit too long, where like the people who were productive in their prime just end up becoming villains because now you're out of touch. Like now, You know what I mean? Like,
I was talking about this with somebody last night about like, but it was basically, they explained it like the boomers, like basically the people who are in power now came up in this period of growth and came from maybe less and very little, but then they won't let go. They've just held on. They won't retire. They won't leave government. They won't like do any of these things.
yeah.
Look at Ellen. Look at her. Sorry.
No. I was gonna say the fact that like our politicians and like these like some of the biggest people in power are literally in their 80s. Like, bitch, what are you doing? Go to a retirement home and just like live. Why are you running a country?
Get on a cruise.
That's the thing. Like, I don't believe that anyone is a bad person. Like, I'm sure. I really think like the difference between me and Jeff Bezos is just circumstance. Like, I don't think Jeff Bezos ever woke up one day intending to be a psychopathic billionaire. But I think he had good intentions and he just went on for too long. Like, because capitalism instills like an illusion of security, like even when you have $1 billion, you're still scared to lose it all. And like that's what keeps a lot of cruelty going.
Well, he also he went to my undergrad, and there's a lot of stories about him, and just like I also think like bullying and trauma and whatever like leads
apparently. It's just, it's madness.
I wonder, to elaborate on your question, whether it's an issue of like immortality, because when you're riding the high of being like rich and successful, it feels like you've got all this legacy and it's going to last forever, and you're not really like, no one thinks about when they're going to die because we just don't know, and it seems so far from the future. But would anyone actually be that much of a psychopath if everyone knew when they were going to die? Because then you would have that on your mind of like, what am I going to do with this time that's left? Oh, in 20 years, I can't change my impact anymore, or what happens with all this wealth. So I wonder whether it's a question of like you live long enough to see yourself be the villain, or whether you feel like you're living for that long because you don't have an appropriate sense of when it's over.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go on. Sorry.
I was thinking about this recently, how like men specifically create that like a legacy is immortality.
Yeah.
You know, they're so terrified of being forgotten. It's just this insistence on leaving their mark on the world to any means necessary. So, you know, but like in your own head, like look at Trump, it's not a negative to them. They don't see themselves as bad guys. Yeah. Like they legitimately see themselves as saviors. So their entire lives are like, even, you know, Hitler having murdered all those people, he was like, good job, me. And then you know, like it's so weird, like crazy. And then he's like, as he's dying, he's like, well, my legacy will live on forever. And it's just, it's this obsession with immortality and not being able to let go and just be alive and then dead, that causes, I think, maybe causes these people to do that kind of thing as well.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think all cruelty in the world stems from the fear of death, and like a lot of material issues would be resolved if everyone was forced to face their mortality. Like because I honestly think the only thing that gives life meaning is the fact that it ends. Like the fact that one day we'll all not be here, like makes life so much more meaningful. It gives you a sense of urgency. It it's so much more meaningful when someone commits to loving you, because you know that they have a limit on time. Like, this nigga is choosing me for the small 30 years of life that he has left. Like, that's so meaningful. And I feel like if like people went into every situation, every circumstance with that in mind, they just make better decisions. Like, they just truly would, and more like compassionate decisions. Yeah, it's
Have
so
you found the pandemic soothing?
Especially in the beginning. Well, I was just working this really shitty, like just the worst job in the world that was paying me like peanuts. And then when the pandemic ended, I was like, wait, oh my God, like the world is actually ending. Like, let me quit this job right now. And I did. And I just felt so much more free, and it gave me a lot more peace of mind and like clarity about how I want to spend my days. I also just think like capitalism pausing gave me a lot more peace of mind.
Yeah.
Being forced to like be by myself gave me a lot more peace of mind, because I just started baking and cooking more. But yeah, and then the financial issues came, and like I sort of snapped out of that. But generally, I've enjoyed it. What about you guys? Like, has the pandemic been soothing? I also know that's a privilege, but yeah.
Earlier, I said that I appreciate a job because it gives me something to do. And I also remember when I was in K through 12, I was like, in the summer, I would always be bored without school and kind of lost. And I would appreciate when school started again because it gave me something to do. So like I appreciated at first when we all went online, but now like there's no school, and I kind of feel like I need like not capitalism, but a system in place that gives me something to do.
Yeah.
Give me capitalism. Yeah.
You think you could create your own structure?
So I have an apocalypse plan.
Ooh.
Yeah. So it involves the farm, which obviously everyone is involved is invited for. So you have to find some kind of teleporting device as well in this plan, because you're all over the world. But anyway, assuming that you do, we raid all the pharmacies to get medicine, and because you can grow all the food, get the seeds, get as many weapons as possible. And then we go down to the farm and fortify the farm, and we make and I'm in charge. I am a dictator for a year, or however long it's like, the beginning stages happen, because you just need one person in charge, and it's my house, okay? And there's teachers, there's warriors, there all these things. My mom's showing everyone how to grow vegetables. My dad is showing people how to use guns. We go out and terrorize people so that they won't attack us. And yeah, and then after the time that is up, it's in a charter already, okay? We'll have a vote, and if I'm doing a good job, I get to continue, and if not, then it's up to whatever, and we reform again. So that was my apocalypse plan. And people got very offended because I was like, you can't come. You will mutiny me. So you're going to be locked up in the basement, either for entertainment or you're going to be killed because I can't trust you.
That's
When you just said dictator, it made me think of so like there's about ethics again, and that like ethical dilemma. China is such an interesting conversation because like we love Xi, he's listening. Lol. Anyways, but there's something. So like I was saying before with sustainability, like the fact that China has a dictatorship and thus doesn't need to like put, or doesn't need to follow the rules of democracy, so doesn't need to put anything through, means that for climate change stuff, they can eradicate it so quickly. They did what the US took 15 years to do in terms of lowering air particles, so the pollution. They did that in 4 years. Like, because they just were like, no, you're all going to be freezing in winter because none of you are allowed coal. And like, yeah, a ton of people were like suffering, and it's horrible. but like it's so like the fact that they also
It's
have the
effective.
system means that they just go like, well, this is a thing we've decided is a problem, and so we're just going to solve it. I'm not saying I support the Chinese government, but because I thoroughly don't. But in terms of ethics, it's just such an interesting thing when, like, what you talk about, Bobo, as well, like the idea of like liberty being really like a false promise.
Yeah, it's so oppressive. I hate it. It's so ghetto. I don't want democracy is just so ghetto. Like I just don't believe everyone has the range to be making decisions. So it's just, especially like I just don't think everyone deserves freedom too. Like if you're homophobic, why do you deserve freedom? Like
does it come down to like education though?
Huh?
Does it come down to like education though? Like if everybody was taught to like have the range, would it change it?
I think it comes down to shared morality. Because I think like Jordan Peterson is co-educated, but he just hates women. Like as much as he denies it, I'm sure I've heard that he's made some points. I've heard that he like has interesting points in some areas, but like when I think about would I want to live in this, if I had 100 people society, would I want to live in there with Jordan Peterson, as educated as he is, in a like no, I wouldn't, because you clearly just hate women. So like I don't believe you deserve rights. Like I just
Utopia requires many deaths before we get there. Like kill all men between the age of 21 and 30 or like 50 even. Sorry.
But
sorry.
yeah, no, men, I don't know. I also think like anarchy is also the only ethical way to live. Like I think there's something that's fair about anarchy because it's not biased. It's not randomness. Like randomness isn't biased. It just is. And like the world is inherently chaotic and random. And I don't think like our God, or like the creator of the simulation, is intentionally cruel to anyone or is like bigoted. I think that like our world is just random. And that randomness, I guess, is fair, as cruel as it is. And I don't know that it's possible to police like the chaotic nature of like randomness and the cruelty that comes with randomness. I think we can only just like learn to live alongside it. I don't know how do you guys feel?
That's really cool. That made me think of like, why are we trying to control randomness, control chaos by like creating order? Like, why are we taking randomness and creating order all the time and failing and then blaming ourselves?
Well, I think
maybe the reason why things are so bad is because we keep trying to control it instead of letting it roam freely.
Yeah. I feel like nature has a way of like regulating and balancing itself out. And I don't know if this is true, but this is just my theory, that I feel like a lot of the cruelty and unnecessary suffering comes from trying to structure and order and regulate chaos. Whereas I feel like chaos would balance the cruelty of itself out if we just let it. Like in the same way that like forest fires help the environment because they help like bring new life. But I don't know, if you put out the fire earlier than you need to, aren't you just creating more damage? And I sort of doing like I think we should just all be anarchists. Like there should be no rules. We should just have small little societies where we just do what we need to do and like
right. But you saying that, but if you were living it, you wouldn't like that though. Like and interesting with Jordan Peterson, he has a book like Order and Chaos that like, and one of his things is, it's the balance between order and chaos. Like I mean, yeah, in theory, anarchy is great, but if you're if you're just under your tree, Bobo, eating mangoes, and people come along and start like, stealing your mangoes, you'd be like, hey, and they're like, man, it's anarchy. You're like, no, like you do need structure. It's like when Lavender was talking about her job, it's your structure is important, but it's important not to overstructure your life. Like consciousness needs your body to go in the world. That's a structure, and nature has a structure in order to be in the world as well. So I think we are overly ordered, and
Well, is this all?
I always go back to the idea of like globalization when I always end up going back to it when we start talking about stuff like this, because it's just like it's just so large. Like the system is so big now, like it's actually like not manageable to be like so interconnected and to have 7 billion people alive. Like it's just so chaotic. Whereas I feel like before, I mean, without any context, because I never obviously lived it, but when we were in smaller communities and like, having structure is easier because there's less to control and there's less to like demand from people, because it's kind of like coherent. It's sort of like when you were saying with like the idea of a billionaire. Like we cannot even fathom the amount of money that they have. And I feel like it's the same thing with like how vast the world is. Like I cannot even fathom that some like random bitch from Hong Kong will be like somehow connected to some random other bitch from somewhere else. And we affect each other.
Is the scale like the reason we have billionaires? Because like in your small community, you want to be a big deal and that's enough for you. But now that you have to prove to the whole world all connected, now you need a bit.
Oh my God, yes.
Globalism.
Should we end globalization? Oh my God, I'm screaming.
Done.
Then none of us would know each other.
Yeah, true. No, we just shouldn't end it. I think it's just about regulating it. Like, I guess it's about learning to live. Yeah, I guess it's about like, it's just about balance, I suppose.
Because it's like what we were talking about before with fast fashion. Like, oh my God, I cannot even imagine how many factories there are of people slaving every day to make a fucking t-shirt. It's so insane. And like the food we have, like I think it's do not quote me on this, but I think it's like 10, like we eat like 90% of our food or something is the same 10 fruit produce. And like we've completely like, and that's just mind-blowing, because like we would have all been eating different things, but I don't even know where my like bananas come from. Like my bananas, like some other person had to do this other thing to like, it's just so insane. Like everything we have is like 700 bits in front of us and away from us, and we're so far removed from everything.
No.
That's wild.
On that point, I think when we talk about like the distinction between order and chaos, we talk about it as like, like law and order versus complete randomness. But like in nature, and like as a mathematician, in nature, it's not randomness, it's patterns and seasons and cycles. And like there are the seasons in nature, and within each of us there are seasons and cycles of our moods and emotions and skills and everything. And in this like law and order society, we've completely taken seasonality out of the equation and replaced it with like monotony. Like you do 9 to 5 every single week. There are no seasons to your working life. You're just in a week by week routine, which is uniform. And so like even the food we eat, we don't eat mangoes in summer and like apples in winter anymore. We just eat the same things all year round, and we've completely disregarded the seasons that nature intended us to live in.
Yeah.
And
There
yeah,
are
I
no
think
Such a good
seasons.
point.
if we go away from law and order, we're not necessarily going to randomness, we're going towards seasonality.
Wait, I'm actually screaming.
It also reminds me of this idea of emergence. I'm gonna send it into the chat. This idea that like randomness creates patterns and nature creates patterns and like
Yeah.
emerges into things by just embracing its chaoticness.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
felt like
absolutely-
COVID was that. Like I felt it coming, and then it like grew. Like it was like something from nature emerging.
That's,
Yeah.
I mean, even
Ah,
COVID is a pattern, right? Like every 100 years, there's like a plague, and it was time.
yeah.
Absolutely. That's why, like, as a statistician, I think everyone should study statistical distributions, because you realize that things in nature don't happen randomly. They fall within specific patterns and seasons that you can
It's kind
actually
of like-
quantify.
It's kind of like how there's no new ideas. Like in the art world, we always talk about the fact that like everything is an imitation of something else. Like nobody discovers anything. It's just constantly in cycle. So randomness doesn't exist. It's always something's, like something can't be random. There's always like something behind it. I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah. Have you guys heard of sacred geometry?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, it's basically about this too, where like I read a whole book about it. I don't know if it's a spiritual practice, but it's the fundamental theory of it is that everything is math and like patterns, and like the language of the universe is math and geometry, to be specific. It also says like if you draw, there's something called the flower of life, which is apparently the pattern through which everything emerges from. If you actually like draw it over and over again, you'll start to feel like more in tune with the universe, apparently. I'm gonna switch on the light.
I don't know if
literally only
anyone
watched
else
the
has
video
taken,
last night.
if anyone's taken psychedelic drugs, but if you take enough of them and you go in nature, you just see geometry basically.
Yeah.
Like hallucinating geometry, like all the trees look exactly the same, and I think it's really cool. Even the clouds, like you see all the patterns in the clouds, and it's like you're seeing math.
Do you think robots taking all of our jobs will allow us to better connect with nature and ourselves again?
No,
we talk
because
about-
Elon Musk is going to be the next dictator, and he's literally going to ruin our lives.
He's doing the same thing we just talked about. If he's like, okay, what we were talking about with China with the emissions, he's like, I want to save humanity. I want to take like X samples of human DNA and like human people to Mars as a backup in case we get blown up. So he's just like, I don't really care like how many people I destroy in the process, because like I'm helping humanity.
Wow.
It's
But honestly, like,
area.
yeah, I feel like he said that he wants to combine human consciousness with robots, and honestly, I want to try it out. So like, I will sign up to turn into a half like cyborg, and when I'm like 80 years old or something.
Yeah.
If it happens, it's going to ruin the world anyway. So you may as well like be the first among it and enjoy it.
I'm just gonna do it for 5 years and then like unplug myself. Like, you know that show, the show that's like on Netflix and all the episodes are animated? I forgot what it's called. Love, Death, and Robots. It's like one of those episodes.
Oh, I haven't watched that.
The Midnight Gospel, that one.
Oh no, Love,
Yeah.
Death, and Robots.
Oh,
And the episode is called Zima Blue, and it's about this. It's basically about a robot and his journey to like killing himself.
Oh wow! Wait, I need to watch this.
Yeah, and all the episodes are like 10 minutes or 4 minutes. Like, yeah.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
What was the name of the episode again?
Zima Blue. I'll type it in the chat.
Oh, thanks.
I think it's fascinating because like there are so many jobs that like so many of us don't want to do. Like I don't want to be a cleaner, and like I don't think there are many people who like want to like be like
Clean.
I don't know, cleaning like somebody else's shit in a toilet. And I just feel like I don't know, because I don't know enough about AI, but I think it's in like the idea of, it's kind of, again, it's that toss up of like, are we sacrificing something by having like technology run the world, but kind of it already is. But then it's like, yeah, like if a robot can do all the things that we don't want to do, we all have the space. Then again, I'm coming from the perspective of an artist where I'm like, my skills would be valued beyond what currently a robot could provide. But I'm like, we would all just have the space to like be creative thinkers who just like, which isn't what everybody wants to do, but like you could just like lie in bed all day and it would be fine because like a robot's doing your thing. I mean, you'd have to get money.
I feel like
do we need
really funny.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, the funny thing about Elon Musk, though, is like he's equally the person who's like, oh my God, the AI is going to kill us all. / I'm also building this robot that you can put in your brain. And it's very confusing. I don't know what he's doing. Like, he's just gaslighting the whole world before he does the thing. I don't know. And then making himself out like, I warned you and I've built it. I was the monster that I was warning you about. Like, it's very bizarre.
Well, you know, the joke over how he and Grimes met was about this paradox that apparently as soon as you know it, it curses everyone. So maybe I shouldn't talk about it. But it's sort of like this idea that if you don't help, if the AI already is built in the future, and like if you didn't help him or if you didn't help build it, it will go back in time and kill you.
I'm screaming.
And that's how they connected over like a punny joke about that paradox or that like curse thing. And that's like how they met. So maybe he's building
literally doing it though.
So he doesn't get punished. Like maybe he's doing it for like.
It's like Freud being like, oh, if I don't discover how to make the neutron bomb, then someone else will and use it amongst people. I better discover how to. Well, he didn't think that, but you know, like, it's very strange. So he might think he's living in a superhero movie, like Edward Snowden.
Wow.
I noticed like a lot of other people haven't had the chance to talk if they wanted to like jump in to give like a conversational space. Maybe.
Yeah.
Anyone? Don't be shy.
We talked about earlier how like homophobes should have rights and stuff. Like, why are we letting these people who aren't good like exist under a democracy? And I proposed this question on my Instagram. I was like, I want to have a procreation license, and my friends are like, you can't do that. People have a right to, you know, give birth and stuff. And I was like, no, I don't. Abusers shouldn't be having kids. And la la la. And but under a democracy, like I live in America, like people are allowed to be racist and homophobe. They just can't like physically hurt people, but I just don't think they should be existing still.
Honestly,
and running free.
Well, no. I don't think they shouldn't. I don't think they don't need to exist. I think they don't need to exist around me. Like I think we should just, like, basically I don't believe in integration. Like, I don't believe that we all need to get along. Why? Like, why do I need to get along with Trump? Like, why? There's so many people that I actually don't need to get along with, and we're all like forced to believe that like we all need to integrate and live harmonious. No, like, I don't think we should.
I was literally just going to say, oh, we should just put them all in an island together and not give them any weapons or whatever. But that happened before. It was called England, and they went around and they conquered everyone. You know, it's like they were like, we're bored now. Let's just go and beat everybody up.
Yeah.
I also think that whole like we need to everyone be nice to each other, everyone forgive. It only ever serves to let bullies bully other people, because then you have to forgive them and you have to get along with them. So the onus is then on the person who's down here to make the person up here feel comfortable so that you can both coexist. Like, it never actually is an equal on both parts thing if you have to live and get along together.
Do you think forgiveness rewards the abuser?
It does, because it helps take away their guilt that they were holding on to. Unless they don't have guilt and they don't empathize with what happened.
I think that forgiveness is for you. not
Do you
the
think
other
then that you should tell people when you forgive them, or should you keep it to yourself so that they stay with the guilt?
I'd rather keep it to myself and let them live with the guilt, because the guilt is their punishment.
Yeah.
It might help them become better.
I don't, yeah.
I
I
think
actually
have you
don't
truly
believe in
forgiven?
punishment though, either.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
You,
I feel
Like
like
you truly forgive if you're like, I sorry, I don't know how to articulate my question anymore. But like, if you still want them to feel guilty, have you actually truly like forgived and accepted?
ooh, yeah.
I feel like forgiveness and acceptance are like different things. Like when I think of forgiveness, I don't really know if I not believe in it, but like, do you know what I mean? Like that it's like something that I feel like I'd rather accept something than forgive someone, because I feel like forgiving someone is just a waste of space because it already happened and it's already a thing. And so like all I have to do is go like, okay, it happened, and like I'm gonna move on with my life and do. But forgiveness feels so much more complex to me.
It is. I think it's about letting go of any of the like negative emotion that is attached to it, like like being able to kind of heal the trauma. I think that's what forgiveness is. It's about healing that within yourself. Like you can accept, like, and acceptance is the first one. Like I don't necessarily think forgiveness has anything to do with the other person, because you can be abused by someone and forgive them within yourself, but they never have to know that. Because if you are searching, because sometimes when people forgive, they want the other person to be like, thank you, like I feel so guilty. But when they don't feel that way, like your forgiveness can't be dependent on their guilt or not, I think.
And their reaction.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
it's a really hard thing.
Pete Walker, who writes a lot about PTSD and complex PTSD, he talks about how a lot of people skip the self-protective part of the process, which is the angering and the blame about what happened, and they go straight to forgiveness. Like, oh, I should never be angry. Anger is bad. And if you don't learn to feel the whole spectrum of the emotions, it's like a false forgiveness. And so you have to get fully angry and fully process all the bad until you can forgive. And that forgiveness should be for you, and so that you can establish a relationship that helps heal you, not for them.
I
yeah,
guess,
you
like,
can completely. Yeah, sorry.
No.
Really quick. I was saying you can forgive someone and then also be like, you are getting nowhere near me ever again. I don't want to talk to you. Don't, like there's serious boundaries, like you don't have to, forgiveness is not an open door back into someone's life, So sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, then I wonder, like, what is the difference? I guess the difference between forgiveness and acceptance, because like when I think of forgiveness, the first thing that comes into my mind is the like phrase "forgive and forget," and like I just don't know whether
That's
I think my dad said something like really profound once. My grandfather was like had paranoid schizophrenia and ended up murdering someone and went to prison for the rest of his life. And my dad said this thing one time where he was like, I don't like when people talk about this idea of like, that like, he was like, it never goes away. Like, it's fine. It happened. I've moved on. It's been, 20 years, whatever. But like, but I still feel sadness about it, and that's never gonna like leave. And it was just this really interesting thing where he like that made me think differently about how, like, he was just like, like you can't get rid of something just inherently being upsetting or inherently being traumatic or whatever it is. I don't know. Forgiveness is so interesting. I just wonder what the difference is between forgiveness
Similar
and
to like grief, I
acceptance.
think.
Pardon?
Like how I think people look at grief as like this, like a temporary thing.
Yeah.
Whereas, or like in my experience, I feel like grief, it never really goes away. It's just, say, like you have a death, someone close to you, there's like a period where you just kind of get used to them, not like you accept it, which is, I guess, seen as the grieving period. Whereas for me, like the reality is like the grief never goes away. It's just, you just learn to live with it.
Yeah.
I think that's because we don't really see emotions as a spectrum. Like we just see like happy, sad, or like mad. Like there's nothing in between.
I think that also goes back to like my point about that like emotions happen seasonally too. Like if you were to draw grief, I think that it would be a process of like a line that is really wavy and then kind of diminishes to the point where the ups and downs aren't as like big and shocking, but they're still there and it still happens in that pattern that just evolves over time. But I think people think that, you know, you go through being sad and then you go to being happy and then you go to this, and that it's like a static change instead of like a seasonal change.
Do people, this is for women or people with uteruses, or do you map your energies in the month that like coincide with your menstruation?
Do we match our energies?
You map your energies, or do you know what your energies are based on what day or week you are, based on menstruation?
Part of me thinks that's like a patriarchal scam. Like I've never put stock in it, and like I've never.
No, really?
But I don't know. Maybe that's just my personal experience of it. It's just different than other people.
What do you mean by energy?
As in like, so for me, for the I'll have a week of creativity, and then I'll have a week of quite tiredness, and it's almost like there's a spring, summer, autumn, winter within the month of. I've just noticed it. Like it came up with me being able to do songs and stuff. I kept noticing that like, oh, there's a specific time in the month that I am able to do this, that it just comes so naturally. And then I was like, oh yeah, there's also a specific time that I'm more tired. And then there's this, you know, and obviously I'm more grumpy, or like I'm more emotional. And I've read a little bit about it as well, and it is you know, these mystical ones, they're like talking about it. But I do think it's a thing for me anyway. I just wondered, because we were talking about seasons, Olivia.
I subscribe to that too. I read it in a book somewhere, but I don't know which book it was. And I noticed that I am more tired like the week before, and then like after I'm more like creative and I want to dance and do art. So I think like, but under capitalism, like it doesn't honor how like the cycle is, so we're made to always have to be like on top of things and productive and boss babes, instead of like honoring when we're tired or honoring downtimes and stuff.
Yeah, this is also why like women don't suit like the male work day, because we get more we do get more tired based on our menstruation and stuff like that. It is an actual thing.
There was an interesting thing I saw that was like, you know, the stereotype of women like PMSing and being emotional is actually the time our bodies produce testosterone predominantly and not estrogen. It's like the dip in estrogen. So it's like we have 1 week of being more like a man, and like that's the time when they accuse us of being weak.
Oh my god, men are so emotional at work. Like it's actually hilarious to me. Like they think that anger is not an emotion. Like your inability to control yourself and your anger is an emotion. Like they just think sadness is an emotion. For some, I'm saying you know, general men that I've met.
Gavin, as our resident male person, what is your thought?
A thought on emotion?
Yeah, like when you look at the females in your life, or the female identifying people or not, do you project like, oh, she's being emotional because of her menstruation? Has there ever been a thought that's crossed your mind?
So. I grew up, I think I'm pretty lucky because most of my family are women. Like I have 4 sisters, no brothers. My parents, like my mum only has female siblings and my dad has mostly female siblings. So I've always lived around a lot of women growing up. So I think, I never really had that kind of taught to me.
Oh,
Or
it's a
not
topping,
like
yes.
not outside of like mainstream media and brainwashing, I guess. And also because I have ADHD, so like I've always been an emotional person, like having trouble regulating my emotions. So I guess for me, it seems more normal.
In China, Chinese opera, women when they're on their period get like the week off, and it's like a really like random little thing where it's like one of the only spaces I know it's part of practice that they get the week off, because your menstruation changes your voice. So for performers, it actually has an impact on your vocal quality and your ability to perform. But in like mainstream theater or mainstream performance worlds, that's not a practice, but it's just this really like it's an actual thing that's like, you know, been, you know, centuries old or whatever, that like they just get it off.
That is so interesting, because literally, like I'll be singing and I'll sing the same song, and then it'll be like a couple of days. I'm like, oh, I can't even sing. My voice has changed, and nobody can hear it but me. But like that is, I must look that up. That sounds interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, there should be menstruation leave every month, I think.
No, there should.
Personally.
I'm like so tired when I'm on my period. But I'll just be in bed. Like for the first 3 days, my period tries to kill me. So I just am like exhausted from doing nothing. But emotionally, I don't feel much of a difference. It's really interesting.
It's so interesting to me because I got an IUD, so I haven't had an actual like period in almost 3 years. So when I hear my friends like complain about like the pains they're going through, and I used to remember like having crippling pain every month where like my back would hurt so bad that like I would just want to lie down and die, and just like the privilege to not have that because I've been able to get into this thing that's saved me every single month for the last 3 years is just astonishing to see.
Yeah.
Like
Wow.
how much time off like work and school and stuff women would take just from like period pain and like not getting paid for that or anything.
I think a lot of women don't actually experience it, and then some women experience it really badly. You know, like, and like if it was me and I was I would probably only need the first day, because that's when I'd like sometimes I'd start vomiting or nearly faint or whatever, but that is quite rare. Well, it's rare these days. But then some women are like, what are you talking about? You get cramps? I'm like, yes. Like, I die. Like, how dare you be left out of this?
I know.
Share my pain.
I wonder if like some of it though, like I noticed in my school, like it was this competition over thinness and like how can you not get it? And like it has become like pervaded the culture of just like, you know, the less you exhibit these symptoms, like the better you are or the thinner you are, or but maybe that was just my like fucked up high school.
Yeah.
Think about the ability to I don't know the actual term, but like de-sex yourself, like the way that we do with animals, like like getting vasectomies, or like if women had the option to like just opt out of all of it, like or sorry, anyone with, you know, just had the option to opt out of it, how would that, what are people's thoughts on that?
I think about this every month. I'm just like, I want to click the unsubscribe button.
I saw like, this is more random facts that I learned from TikTok, so maybe like look them up, but there was a fertility doctor that was talking about how the week of the sugar pills is actually was a Catholic doctor who thought that birth control would be more amenable to religious people if it simulated the natural cycle, and actually you don't need to take that week at all, and you don't have to get a period ever, like you don't need it.
Wow.
Yeah, I read that, and I've been doing that myself. I've been on the pill since I was like 14 or something. But recently I've just given up having periods altogether, and it's actually so freeing just not having to accept it. Yeah.
In your life, like,
sorry?
Has it changed anything in it, like emotionally, physically, or
It
not?
just sort of got rid of that like week where I would be really like irritable and tired, and like that dip has just gone away, and it's really consistent. But one thing is that it seems though if I do forget to take them and then I do get my period, like it's way worse than it used to be. So I feel like you either have to do all of the regular cycles, or the one-off ones are going to be a lot worse.
Yeah.
I find that I save a shit ton of money because I don't have to buy pads or tampons or panty liners. Like, the amount of money it has saved me is astounding.
Wait,
I'm just too busy. I don't have time to be stressing about like packing supplies to go to work and buying things and making sure I like go to the groceries and do all the stuff.
Yeah. So interesting. Wow. Okay, we've been talking for almost 3 hours.
Really? Wow.
I know. This has been really fun. This has gone really well. I enjoyed conversations. Probably just upload, if you guys don't mind, to the Patreon. If you have any objections, let me know and I can blur out the face. Upload it to like the Patreon. But yeah, this has been really good. I just picked this time because I felt most of the time zones were Australia and England, so which are like the two polar opposite time zones. But if you guys have any other ideas for like what time works better, I'm very open. If you have any other ideas for platforms other than Zoom, I'm also open to suggestions, or just any suggestions in general. If you have a theme, I really liked the conversation about forgiveness. I'm going to think about that a lot. Maybe we can expand on that.
Yeah.
Natalism.
Oh yeah.
Antinatalism.
I also want to interview an antinatalist.
I'm antinatalist.
Are you? Okay, yeah.
Yes.
I think most of us here aren't we?
Yeah, are we all?
What is natalism?
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Do you wanna describe it?
Sure. So natalism is people who are fine with people procreating, and antinatalism is you're not in support of that. Even if the world was good, like you're still not in support of people having children because the child didn't consent to come into this world, whether it's good or not.
Okay.
That sounds
so antinatalism is that you don't approve of children coming into the world?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then the child never has the opportunity to see if life is like good or not either. Like even if they didn't consent to being alive, they never have the opportunity to consent to anything ever because they were never alive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can always kill yourself. Like, that's an option. You can just go. You hate it. If you're never here, you can never just leave.
Is it related to how the child comes into the world as well, or is it just the child existing?
They believe like
it's based on existence.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a really.
Oh, we should also talk about pro-suicide too. I'm also pro-suicide.
Can we also talk about cults?
Yeah.
Oh, I love a good cult.
Oh my! Is anyone?
Yeah.
Or has anyone been in a cult?
I want to run away to one. It sounds like a good existence.
I feel like this could turn into a cult if we actually move to like one of those societies, like communal living. Like I feel like yeah, like my
Scientology can do it.
I guess that I've watched so many cult documentaries that tell me like us all critical thinkers would not survive in a cult together.
But if it was a cult based on critical thinking and that's all we did all day,
Yeah. But then I feel like we would break apart the idea of having critical thinking be a thing, and then we would all just disband and go into our own direction.
That's when we all
You
drink the
wouldn't have the
Kool-Aid.
opportunity because I would be your leader and I would just lock you up in the dungeon with all the other undesirables.
It already sounds like.
Have you guys watched The Leftovers?
Huh?
No.
Oh my god, it's this really if you're interested in like suicide, death, cults, like it just touches on all of those themes. It's this fascinating show. The first season is a bit boring, but the second and third are absolutely incredible. But it's the show about like this small town where 2% of the population just disappeared. Like actually no, not just the small town. Yeah. It's about it's the show where like 2% of the world's population just disappears, and like how humans deal with that grief, with that uncertainty, with like not knowing why it happened, with not knowing where everyone went, and then like a cult forms as a result. And it's really interesting, and like there's a lot of mental health issues involved, and like it's just a fascinating show about the human condition. So
Is this called The Leftovers?
Yeah, it's called The Leftovers. It's on HBO.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you should look into it. Also, I love your cat.
Oh.
You have the cat.
Yeah, it's my partner's cat. Her name's Lola.
Lola, I love Lola.
Yeah, I thought I would bring her on. Sorry if it was anything was distracting in my background or anything.
No, not at all.
If you're into cult dramas, there's one called Save Me. It's on Netflix. It's a Korean drama. It's pretty brutal, but it's pretty interesting. I think you should check it out if you like cult stuff. I don't know if it's on Netflix everywhere, but it is in the US.
Okay, I'll have to check it out. But yeah, so yeah, send me your suggestions, or if you just have any other Patreon suggestions at all, I'm open. I'm still like navigating all the things and learning as we go along. But yeah, this was so fun. Thanks for joining. I hope we can do this again soon. Ideally, I'd like to do it more than once a month, but I guess we'll just have to see.
I think the time was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, the time works for me.
Yeah, for me too.
Okay.
It's like 10 to 2 in the morning.
Maybe I'll just keep it. Yeah. Do you guys prefer during the week or on the weekend?
The weekend for
I
me.
think weekend.
Yeah, weekend.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the Saturday, Sunday thing was perfect because like nobody could have work stuff.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully.
All right, lovely. Well, thank you guys for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'm gonna go have dinner.
Nice to meet everyone.
I'll catch you.
Yeah. Really cool to see everyone in person.
Yeah.
Yeah, now we'll have like a totally different way of interacting. In the, there's a real person. It's weird. We could talk.
I also think social media was like this. Like we'd all be kinda, and like there'd be a lot less assholes. But yeah.
Oh, like a video chat social media platform? That's so interesting.
I don't think my psychic could handle it.
All right.
Okay,
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.